President Trump has been adamant that he wants to see this war end. And not only this war, but these many other wars and conflicts that he's ended. This is something that's very near and dear to him and very important to him. And you'd have to say that Vladimir Putin was not particularly responsive to his peace efforts over the past couple of weeks, which I think would be very disappointing to the president. The president's a very experienced negotiator. He's not going to get discouraged. But when you see that negotiations aren't going the way you want them to go, you need to ramp up the pressure. And I think with the 19th package coming out of the EU, almost simultaneously with Secretary Bessent increasing the sanctions, I think these are the first times we've imposed sanctions under President Trump. And they're extensive on Rosneft and Lukoil. And I think it's an indication that we need to step it up. We're willing to step it up. And hopefully Vladimir Putin will get the message and understand that the war needs to come to an end. He doesn't seem to have gotten that message yet, but hopefully this will bring it home.
So if he doesn't understand the message from the United States, are you prepared to do even more?
I assume that we would do more. You're not going to see, I don't think you're going to see American troops in Ukraine anytime soon, if at all. But I think that the president will continue to ramp up the pressure until Russia realizes this war is not in its best interest. I think most of the indications coming out of Russia are that people are lined up at gas stations. The economy is not doing well. Inflation is out of control. They've got support from the Chinese, which is unfortunate. I think if they didn't have that support, we'd be a lot closer to a resolution. I wish the Chinese would stop that. But I think the United States and Europe will continue to ramp up pressure until the Russians realize that the war is no longer something that is going very well for them. They seem to be at a stalemate on the battlefield, and but the Russians continue to pour money into this and arms into this and lives into this, their own people. At some point that needs to come to an end, and hopefully these sanctions will bring home the fact that it's time.
We, of course, saw action from the United States towards India to make sure that they're also not buying Russian oil. President Trump has made the comment that he will bring this up if he indeed goes ahead with a meeting with President Xi Jinping. Do you think that's a very likely scenario, that the President Trump will be asking China to also take that step?
So the president and Xi Jinping have a good relationship. And given the differing views of each country, I think that they're, on a personal level, they have a good relationship. The president is an excellent negotiator, and if you're asking me to predict what he will do or what he will bring up, then you're asking the wrong person, because I have no idea what he will do or bring up. But I think it would be reasonable for him to do so, and I think it's I would be surprised if he didn't at least raise the issue with China that it was not in the world's best interest. It was not in the interest of peace. It was not in the interest of prosperity. It wasn't in the interest of global trade for them to continue to support this Russian effort. But I don't know what he'll bring up. That's just my surmise.
We shall find out when the meeting takes place.
Yes.
In the meantime, I would like to understand whether there was coordination between the U.S. and the EU with this latest move on sanctions.
I don't know if there was. I wasn't involved in it. I did see that President von der Leyen came out very shortly after Secretary Bessent's announcement, and that Secretary Bessent had given her a heads up, and that she came out and was supportive. So I think that's all very positive. But the extent of the inner workings before that would have been between Treasury and the Commission directly.
Very clear. We also got to hear from President Zelensky. He was also in Brussels earlier this morning. And he, of course, welcomed the decision from the United States. He also welcomed the 19th package of sanctions. But then he said, in the past, there were doubts whether the U.S. would go ahead with these sanctions. And yet they're going ahead with them. So in his mind, he thinks that the same could happen when it comes to the decision of Tomahawk missiles being sent to Ukraine. How likely do you think that is?
The president has been very clear that he hasn't made his mind up. And I can't, I'm not going to try and guess where President Trump's mind is going to go on this. I know the Ukrainians would very much like to have these missiles. I know it would balance things out with Russia. I know Russia would consider it an aggressive step, and it's a decision that the president has to make. And given the success of the decisions he's made over the past almost, I guess not quite a year yet, but it's been 8 months. Given the success of those decisions, I have every confidence he'll make the right decision. When I was with him in August, and when I shook his hand to say hi, the first thing I said was, "So what are you going to do for the second 6 months of your presidency?" He had done so much in the first 6 months, accomplished so much, things people never thought he could. So we'll see what he does. I'm generally pleased, or I'd say always pleased almost, and never surprised by what President Trump does.
Given how close the interaction is with President Trump, do you think that at this stage, ending the war in Ukraine is among his top 3 priorities?
Yes. As a matter of fact, he said to me that he thought the war he thought would be the easiest to end has turned out to be the most difficult. And I know that's very personally disappointing for him. I think he takes it personally when the Ukrainians and Russians die on the battlefield. So I think he will do everything he can to, put an end to this.
Now, you have been in Brussels for a couple of months.
Yes.
There's been a lot of headlines this year between the EU and the US. How would you describe the relationship between both as you are in the job now for about 2 months?
I think the relationship's pretty good. I was actually surprised by a few things. I was surprised, I wouldn't say we're aligned on China, but I was surprised how much of a movement there's been in the EU towards the US position on China. I feel like we're certainly more aligned than I thought we would be. On immigration, I think we're becoming more aligned on the immigration issue. I know last year there was a significant reduction in immigration. So I think on those issues we're moving closer together. I thought the trade agreement was huge for both countries. I know that that the deal that President von der Leyen negotiated does not. She's really not getting the credit for how good a deal it was here in Europe. Now, President Trump negotiated a great deal for the United States. That's what he does. But I tell you, President von der Leyen got a good deal too, better than any other country that he's negotiated with. And I think she's not getting the credit she deserves for the deal that she negotiated. I think she got some very good points in that deal. And as we turn that framework into a finalized agreement, I think it'll be to great benefit of both countries and continue this great transatlantic relationship that we've had for the past 250 years, I guess, So I think the relationship's good. I've had very nice responses from the people I've met with here. Been very impressed with the leadership, good people. And we may not always agree, but I think their motives are always good. They just look at things a little differently than we do.
Before we address trade in just a moment, I just would like to conclude with the questions around the defense. Because as you're describing the relationship that you have with the EU, what is your opinion in terms of seeing the EU doing more when it comes to sanctions against Russia? Do you think that they need to step up their game when it comes to more meaningful actions that definitely hurt the Russian economy?
Yes, and I think they did that in that 19th package has, again, I don't know that it's getting the publicity it deserves. I mean, you've got not only sanctions on Russian companies, Russian bank, not oil companies, but banks. You've got sanctions in China. I mean, they've really tried to reach out a little further this time.
It doesn't go on attacking oil like the United States just did.
Yes, well, they did go after the shadow fleet, which I think is very important. Here in Europe, and I think Europe is trying to send a message that progressively they're going to do more. Now, things do not. One thing you learn here when you're here for a little while is things do not go fast. Things go slowly, but I think slowly they're ramping up the pressure. This 19th package, that gives you some idea. The war is only 2.5 years old, so I guess, is it 3.5 years old? Got back to 22, so 3.5, or it's going to be 3. Anyway.
Time flies, yeah.
Yeah, time flies. And this is the 19th package, so they've done this 19 times. And it's tough. They've got to deal with, Hungary's been a difficult partner in this, but they've approved 19 packages now. So I think Europeans will continue to ramp it up. They'll ramp it up till it's over.
Right. Let's talk about trade then. There are a lot of reports suggesting that the U.S. is pressuring the EU to water down climate-related regulations, I should say. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think primarily we're talking about the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And it is neither in the interest of the European Union or the United States for those directives to stay in place. And that's not just me saying that. President Macron from France has said that. Chancellor Merz from Germany has said that. A number of European companies have come forward and said, look, we really can't deal with this. Qatar, I'm not sure which way you pronounce it, I think it's Qatar, right? Has come out and said that we're not going to supply you with LNG if you do this. We can't in our country adopt a net zero goal. The United States has rejected a net zero goal, and Exxon, one of the large energy companies, has already reduced its employment here on the continent. Will reduce it more. And Europe is in a difficult situation. They've seen their GDP, as compared to the United States, decrease significantly. Back in 2008, their GDP was slightly larger than that in the United States. Today, it's 30% lower if you include the United Kingdom, 50% lower if you exclude the United Kingdom. A country like Germany, which is an economic powerhouse viewed in the world, and if you look at GDP per capita in that country today, according to there's a Euro News article that came out in March, GDP per capita in Germany is lower than it is in West Virginia, the state of West Virginia in America, which is the 49th worst state for GDP per capita. The EU average overall and the average in France and Italy is actually below Mississippi, which is the 50th worst state on GDP per capita. So they've got to do something to generate economic growth, and you can't generate economic growth without energy. And if you could run an industrial economy on the level of renewable energy that Europe has now, you wouldn't be having these problems. You've got energy costs terrifically more expensive in Europe than they are in the United States or China, which is really their major competitor. So when you make a Ford in America, you're paying American energy costs. You make a car in China using China's energy costs. You make one here, you're making a Mercedes or a Volkswagen. You're using energy costs in Europe, and you can see Volkswagen is letting off, I think, 35,000 employees. I mean, they've got serious problems, and they need to address it. And these two directives, I think, are serious impediments to growth and prosperity in Europe.
We don't have much time left, but I just would like to get a clarification on this point as to whether the US is willing to revisit the trade deal if the EU doesn't take measures on revising the climate regulation.
Well, it wouldn't be revisiting. If you look at paragraph 12 in the trade framework, it specifically talks about the CS3D and reducing these climate goals and making it so that they weren't an impediment to trade. So it wouldn't be renegotiating. These are part of the deal. And I'm hopeful that Europe will do not only what is consistent with the trade deal, not only what is in the best interest of American companies that do business here, but I hope they'll do what's in their own best interest, because I think an economically viable Europe is an important thing. We need an economically viable Europe as a trade partner. We need them to be able to defend their continent. This is an important aspect of policy over the past couple of years, and they've stepped up and said we're going to spend 5% of GDP on defense. And we could also use help in some trouble spots around the world where we could use an ally such as Europe. So a viable Europe, for example, in the Middle East now, we're going to need to demine, and we're going to need to do things that are going to require personnel and assets, and Europe could be a huge help there. So we want to see an economically viable Europe, but this CS3D, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and Reporting Directive, they're the opposite of legislation or policy that would encourage the economic growth that we'd like to see in Europe, and I believe that Europe would like to see. I don't think that how are you going to pay for this massive social welfare system plus 5% of GDP on defense, right, and not have economic growth? I mean, where's the money supposed to come from? It's got to come from economic growth, and you will not have it with these directives.